What's up, everybody? Happy Saturday to you, or whatever hell day it is when you're watching this video. I wanted to talk for a moment about the Fibonacci sequence, or the golden mean, the golden spiral, the phi ratio, if you will, for a moment. It's funny because for all the, I don't know, shit talking I guess I do about some of the specific New Age things lately, I've actually been through a lot of it myself. I've been fascinated with a lot of these healing techniques, crystals, meditation, healing, or especially cymatics and using frequency and trying to understand binaural beats and how all these things affect our body and mind. And as I've weeded out the bullshit, those are the ones that I'm usually talking about, the ones where you can find no ample evidence to support the claims people are making, but they're still, charging ridiculous amounts of money for it. But that doesn't mean that none of it's true. And when it comes to, well, a lot of what we know to be true, we just know in our hearts, for example, that there's something deeper, a deeper pattern underlying nature, because we can see it. And mathematically, we're beginning to explain it. And some of the patterns we see, like the Fibonacci sequence, coming up in these golden spirals, if you will, which is seen in, like, say, sunflowers, pine cones, pineapples, things like that. It's also seen, supposedly, and there's a lot of shows about it, over the years. I'm sure that all of you have heard at least something about that. And the idea that all these ratios are found within nature, also within galaxies, within the human face and body parts and whatnot. And then there's a dispute that says that all of that's BS and that humans just see what they want to see, and it would be a form of what they call pareidolia, which is pretty much us seeing what we want to see in things. We are wired to seek patterns and look for patterns in things. So when I heard that there was a dispute against these, finding these golden, the ideas that there's beauty found in there, in that specific proportion, I should just read this paper, because I could just go on about it, and it's probably more informative to read the researchers' results. And this part was about something I printed about natural intelligence. The show I was watching, interestingly enough, last night, it was talking about cicadas, and I know they have 13 and 17-year cycles. And there's a reason for that, and I'll explain that here. But that also follows the Fibonacci sequence. Both of those, 13 and 17, are prime numbers that are indivisible by anything except themselves and 1. So it turns out bamboo and many plants have similar growth patterns, but we don't really follow or understand enough of natural cycles. We haven't been researching and studying long enough to see these longer cycles that may take place within nature. But it seems that this sequence comes up everywhere. So it says somehow both bamboo and cicadas were able to time their episodes of sexual reproduction over extended periods. There was one species of bamboo, for example, that first flowered in China in the year 999. And continued to flower and seed every 120 years. Even when this bamboo species was transplanted to places like Japan and Russia, it still kept rigorously to its 120-year cycle. The next part's about the cicadas, and this is from I didn't write the guy's name down here, but this scientist who was studying it, he says, "I'm most impressed by the timing of the cycles themselves. Why do we have 13 and 17-year cicadas, but no cycles of 12, 14, 15, 16, or 18. 13 and 17 share a common property. They are large enough to exceed the life cycle of any predator, but they are also prime numbers, divisible by no integer smaller than themselves. The golden ratio, often represented by the Greek letter phi, is directly tied to a numerical pattern known as the Fibonacci sequence, which is a list of composed numbers that are the sum of the previous two numbers in the sequence. Often referred to as the natural numbering system of the cosmos, the Fibonacci sequence starts out simply by 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5. Most of this is pretty trivial stuff for anybody who studied it, but I figured for anybody who doesn't, I should have make notes of that too. When a Fibonacci number is divided by the Fibonacci number that came before it, it approaches the golden ratio, which is an irrational number that starts out at starts out as 1.61803398887, and once again goes on forever. So the idea is that there really is no golden number. It's a mean, it's an average, it falls within this, you know, somewhere in the 1.618 realm. So the interesting thing was that the argument against this was by a particular guy. His name was Professor something Devlin, and when I read his articles at first, I thought, well, I have to keep an open mind. Maybe there really is, you know, maybe it is all BS, and maybe, you know, but his whole argument was basically against the idea that artists used it in the past, and that beauty is seen through those ratios. But there's no argument against the fact that those patterns actually exist. And that's what makes it interesting. So I'll read the rest of this before I go on. It says, a convincing case for assuming a cosmic character of the golden ratio can be made based on the ubiquity of logarithmic spirals, the researchers write. Spectacular examples include the Whirlpool Galaxy M51, ammonites, the shape of nautilus shells, Hurricane Katrina, and the distribution of planets, moons, asteroids, and rings in the solar system. The researchers suggest that the reason this ratio is so ubiquitous is that it is actually a property of space-time. The argument that this amazing consilience, or self-similarity, arises from a common environmental constraint, which can only be an intrinsic feature of curved space-time, is compelling, they write. The time has come to recognize that relativity and quantum theories can be integrated and linked numerically to the value of a mathematical constant, whether in the context of space-time or biology. Quite why the universe follows this rule, however, is not known. Then I have another article. This is the next one's by that guy Devlin, who was opposed to it. It's very kind of condescending and basically asks questions about the art. You know, where does it start on the... Okay. Basically, this part, it seems a bit arbitrary, as though we're experiencing pareidolia and seeing the golden rectangle in everything. We're creatures who are genetically pre-programmed to see patterns and seek meaning, he says. It's not in our DNA to be comfortable with arbitrary things like aesthetics, so we try to back them up by our often limited grasp of math. But most people really don't understand math, or how a simple formula like the golden ratio applies to complex systems, so we can't error check ourselves. And that's the key right there. As he says, he's a mathematician, and he says most people don't understand math like he does. Therefore, they don't see that there is no specific number that's the golden mean. The problem is that he doesn't realize he's only seeing through a mathematical lens. And all the artists, architects, and musicians, all the people who use this and research it and see it constantly in their lives, they see things through a different lens. So the point being that the mathematician might not see beauty in those proportions. But generally, from studies they've done, if faces are proportioned properly within the golden mean, then people tend to be considered more beautiful or more attractive. And this gets into some existential debates about life and death and I guess the idea that, hey, some people are ugly, it's just the way it is, but we can say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is a completely philosophical argument and a debate that's not for this particular video. I wanted to talk about really just the idea of whether or not what are we missing here as far as this ratio goes. Now, in other words, you see it in shells. We see it all over in nature with physical, physical things like pine cones, like I said, sunflowers, and the petals on flowers, even the way that leaves are arranged on the stems of certain plants. And there was a theory that went that it's the maximum, the best way for a plant to absorb the most sunlight using that system. Well, a researcher that I was reading an article, and he had gone and grown several different plants, many who have a different phyllotaxis, which is the arrangement of the leaves on the plant. And even the ones with an alternate phyllotaxis had the same results. They all got the same amount of sun, more or less. Just because that doesn't answer it, it doesn't mean there's not an underlying mechanism of why it happens. In plants, it's called self-similarity. It means that they tend to reproduce and grow self-similarly, pretty self-explanatory. Humans grow differently, but many systems grow similarity with self-similarity. And the fascinating thing is that it's not just in these physical things we see with our eyes, it's also in numbers. For example, populations of rabbits. I believe that it was Fibonacci, and the reason why this was named after him is he was doing research on rabbits and the populations, and it tended to follow that sequence, that pattern. It fit the 1.618. Well, they even did a study on bees, except for they went backwards through the parents and the grandparents of the bees, and found that going in reverse followed the exact same pattern. It had to do with how females only lay males if they're not fertilized, but if they are fertilized, then they become females. It's a big complex structure that we're just like completely ignorant to. I mean, we don't understand nature as much as we'd like to, because it costs freaking a lot of money to go out and research and have people sitting in the field, and then you have to know what you're looking for. And then you're studying one particular animal, which, you know, some people do it. Like pretty much for every animal or every system out there, there's some science that is researched and funded by a small group or a large group, whatever it might be. But searching for beauty and understanding and patterns isn't something that's largely funded because it's not very profit-oriented. But it is. And that's the key. I think the more that we learn to observe nature, the more we understand how to replicate it. Man has been very stubborn for a long time. We have been trying to replicate nature, but after a while we started stepping away from that and trying to do things our own way. In other words, many designers now of, you know, say aircraft or water vessels, various types of submarines, cars, automobiles, trains and tunnels, they shape a particular train, the nose of it like the nose of a particular bird, I believe, or like that, and then they put these like baffles inside the tunnel that were designed on how owl feathers operate. There's like 3 different components that keep the train quiet as it comes out of the tunnel, and it's like pretty obvious. There's consultants now that actually, you know, I was looking at this, listening to this one lady speak, talking about how she basically, her thing is that she bases all of her research into new development on what is already around us in nature. And one of the most fascinating recent discoveries is in the pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, which since I was a kid I've just been fascinated with and hoped they would find something to prove that it's not a freaking tomb, because it's ridiculous to think it's a tomb. Most people don't even know that there were not hieroglyphics or mummies found inside. It was empty. There was one inscription in an upper chamber that was like graffiti that said Khufu, and so they assumed, oh, it's Khufu's tomb. Well, the Egyptians definitely lived there. Who built it, I'm not going to debate. But the shape of the cavities and the way that the chambers are within the pyramid has fascinated people forever. Recently, using radio equipment and then building an identical structure, replica of the pyramid, using all the same measurements, and they did it assuming there's no voids or cavities within the pyramid itself that they don't know about. They found out that this will amplify the energy that's being put into it somehow. I don't know the specifics of how it works, but I do know they say it's going to help us with nanotechnology and future circuits, because it will help us, well, whatever they do and whatever they need. I mean, I don't understand how all of this works, of course. I am not a complete tech nerd, but I do love technology, and I love to understand how these things operate, and I don't, but I know that shape matters. That's the key. Shape matters. And when it comes to this sequence, you know, it makes me wonder, all the idea of whether or not artists in the past used this particular formula of, you know, the phi ratio in their art, all of that is up for debate. I don't really care. I don't care whether or not the Parthenon was built, you know, using that ratio, or which buildings were. What I want to know is why it's seen right in front of us. I understand it's found in the system of DNA now. I'm not sure of how the specifics of it, because I'd love to say I understand everything about it, but I don't. But self-similarity like this has been found in a whirlpool, the way that water spins around, the crest of a wave, the petals of a flower, a pine cone. Why is the question. Now, in nature on Earth, we could say, well, it has something to do with DNA, but it doesn't. It doesn't have it to do with just evolution, because it's found in animals and inanimate objects like waves, but also out in the galaxy in giant spiral galaxies. It's pretty amazing, but there are plenty of people who want to assume that it really has no value, because I believe that it points to, you know, a lot of people might be afraid it points to creationism, or the people were afraid it's a slippery slope, that people would use it to prove that there's a grand designer. So what if they do or don't? That's not the point. To me, it could be something that's affected by the 90-something% of the universe that we claim is there that we can't see, the dark energy, if you will. You know, there are forces we don't understand and that we can't comprehend. And as humans, the best we can do is try to observe what we can see in our three-dimensional reality, which would kind of be like the imprint of the universal mind, if you will, if you want to call it that. But I'll leave it there. Let me know what you all think, and thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. Hope you teach me something too. Talk to you soon. Peace.